Monday morning. The rain came in sheets off Lake Michigan, climbing the glass flanks of the Halstead Capitol Tower until the 52nd floor was an island above the clouds. Inside, the light was the particular blue-white of institutions that have decided comfort is a liability. Cold, precise, indifferent. A deal worth $4.3 billion was 40 minutes from being signed. Victoria Hale stood at the head of the conference table, 41 years old. The youngest CEO in Halstead's 60-year history, a woman whose name appeared in the same sentence as words like visionary and ruthless with equal frequency. The table in front of her was 12 feet of Brazilian rosewood. Around it sat the architects of the ironclad avionics acquisition, 2 investment bankers from Meridian Partners, the head of Halstead's legal division, the company's CFO, and the COO, Marcus Reeve, who had been maneuvering for this moment for the better part of 3 years. Everyone believed the deal was done. No one noticed the man pushing the cleaning cart through the far door. His name was Daniel Carr. He was 32 years old. He had been mopping floors on the 52nd floor for 8 months, and in those 8 months, not one person in that room had ever asked his name. Daniel arrived at Halstead Capitol every morning at 5:45, before the traders, before the analysts, before the people whose photographs appeared in the financial press. He came in through the loading dock on Wacker Drive, swiped his contractor's badge, and took the service elevator to whichever floor was on that day's rotation. The 52nd floor was the prestige floor, the one with the long rosewood table, the floor-to-ceiling glass, the brass fixtures, the view that on clear days extended to Wisconsin. Cleaning it required extra care. The waste bins were emptied twice daily. The glass was polished without streaks. The espresso machine was descaled every Friday. Daniel did all of it without being seen. This was not metaphor. It was functional reality. When you wore a gray uniform and pushed a yellow cart, a peculiar social invisibility descended around you like a field. People's eyes slid past you the way they slid past furniture, not from malice, exactly, but from the economy of attention that wealth teaches. You are not relevant to my outcome, therefore you do not exist. He had been relevant once. 2 years earlier, he had been a quantitative analyst at Northbridge Trading, one of 7 people on the firm's algorithmic strategy desk, building models that parsed market microstructure the way a cardiologist reads an EKG. He had spent 4 years at Northbridge, and in the final 18 months, he had built something extraordinary, a volatility prediction framework that accounted for second-order supply chain dependencies in defense-adjacent sectors. The model had generated returns that made the desk's managing director look like a genius at the annual investor presentation. The managing director's name was Preston Holt. Preston had received the credit. When Daniel raised the discrepancy, Preston had him walked out of the building by security before lunch. The blacklist in quantitative finance was not formal. It was a series of phone calls between men who golfed together, and within 3 months, every door Daniel had once opened with ease was sealed. He had a daughter. Her name was Lily. She was 7 years old, and she believed, with the absolute conviction of children, that her father could fix anything. He had promised her he would land on his feet. The cleaning contract was not landing on his feet, but it was keeping the lights on. And for now, it would do. He had learned to be quiet. Quiet was safe. Quiet kept the contract. That Monday morning, with the rain hammering the glass and the acquisition team arranged around the rosewood table, Daniel's cart had a faulty left wheel. He had reported it 3 weeks ago. The facilities manager had not yet replaced it. The wheel caught on the threshold between the hallway tile and the conference room carpet, and Daniel overcorrected. And 2 ceramic espresso cups on the edge of his collection tray collided with a sound like a small bell. Clink. The room went still. Victoria Hale looked at him. The silence lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but it had the density of much longer silences. Daniel kept his eyes down, righting the cups, moving to leave. A small incident, easily forgotten. Then Victoria spoke. "Come here." It was not a question. It was the specific register of someone who had never once issued an instruction that was not obeyed. Daniel stopped. He looked up. She was pointing at the empty chair at the far end of the table, the seat directly opposite hers, 12 feet of rosewood between them. He understood immediately that this was performance. The acquisition team was anxious, stretched thin from weeks of due diligence, and a CEO who could afford to stop a multi-billion-dollar meeting to entertain herself was a CEO reminding the room of the hierarchy. He sat down. One of the bankers from Meridian, a man named Jeffrey Strand, who wore his Wharton years the way some men wear a scar, smiled the smile of someone who expects to be entertained. The CFO, a woman named Paula Whitmore, looked at the table. Marcus Reeve, the COO, leaned back in his chair and folded his hands across his chest with the ease of a man watching a sporting event from the good seats. Victoria slid the acquisition report across the table. 43 pages. Tabs color-coded. The kind of document that represented the labor of 30 people across 6 weeks. "We are 40 minutes from signing a $4.3 billion deal," she said. "Give me one reason to sign it, or one reason not to." The room waited. Strand clicked his pen. Someone suppressed a laugh poorly. Daniel looked at the document. His hands were still in the gray cleaning service gloves. He reached across and removed the left glove, set it on the table beside him. He opened the report. He did not start from the beginning. He moved directly to the operational appendix, tab G, page 31, with the certainty of a man who has already mapped the document's architecture by its weight and tab placement alone. He read without expression. The room watched. Strand uncrossed and recrossed his legs. 30 seconds passed. Daniel set the report down. He looked at Victoria Hale across 12 feet of rosewood. "Don't sign it," he said. The smile left the room the way warmth leaves an open window in January quickly, and all at once. Victoria did not react immediately. This, Daniel would later understand, was the tell of someone who has spent a career in rooms where information is a weapon. You do not show that a new piece of data has changed anything until you have processed it completely. "Explain," she said. Daniel turned back to tab G. He placed his index finger on a table near the bottom of page 31, a logistics performance table for Ironclad's primary component supplier, a manufacturer called Sentinel Parts Group based in Tucson. The acquisition contract for Ironclad includes a performance warranty clause linked to their primary supplier. The clause triggers a Department of Defense contract review if Sentinel's on-time delivery rate falls below the performance threshold by more than 12% across any 6-month measurement window. He moved his finger across the row. Sentinel's delivery performance has declined for 3 consecutive quarters. They are currently running 9.7% below threshold. He paused one beat. The next measurement window closes in 11 weeks. If the trend holds and the logistics data in this appendix suggests it will, the DoD review triggers automatically. No one spoke. A DoD contract review on Ironclad's primary revenue stream would freeze the company's receivables for a minimum of 4 months. You would be acquiring a firm whose cash flow is effectively suspended the quarter after closing. He turned to the last page of the appendix, where a footnote in 8-point type referenced the Department of Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement for performance-based logistics contracts. "It's footnote 47, he said, cross-referenced against the Sentinel performance table in Section 4. "The data is all here." Jeffrey Strand had his laptop open. His fingers moved over the keyboard. Paula Whitmore leaned forward. Marcus Reeve's expression had changed in a way that was impossible to categorize at a glance. It was neither surprise nor admiration, but something quieter and more calculated. Strand looked up from his screen. His face was the color of old paper. "He's right," Strand said. The 2 words fell into the room like stones into still water. Victoria Hale looked at Daniel Carr for a long moment. He stood, replaced his glove, and returned to his cleaning cart. "Thank you," he said, and walked out. Victoria did not sign the acquisition that day. She asked for a full, independent audit of the Sentinel performance data, and she asked for it in 48 hours. The audit confirmed every number Daniel had cited. 11 weeks later, Ironclad Avionics received formal notification of a Department of Defense contract review. The company's stock dropped 23% in 2 trading sessions. 3 of the deal's original architects at Meridian Partners were quietly reassigned. The financial press covered Victoria Hale's decision not to proceed with the acquisition as an act of prescience, and her name appeared again in those familiar sentences about vision and precision. She did not correct the record publicly, but she began a private inquiry the morning after the aborted signing. The inquiry was simple. Who is Daniel Carr? The facilities management company that held Halstead's cleaning contract ran a basic background check on all employees, criminal record, identity verification. Daniel's file had nothing unusual, but Victoria was not interested in basic background checks. She asked her head of security, a former federal investigator named Robert Hess, to find out everything. Hess came back 4 days later with a 2-page summary. Daniel Carr, former quantitative analyst, Northbridge Trading, employed for 4 years until his termination 26 months ago. During his tenure, developed a proprietary volatility prediction framework described by a former colleague as the most sophisticated second-order supply chain dependency model I have ever seen built by one person. The model was integrated into Northbridge's algorithmic trading platform. It remained in active use. His name did not appear anywhere in the associated intellectual property filings. The colleague who had offered that description was a woman named Christine Adler, now a portfolio manager at a competing firm. She had answered Hess's questions with the candor of someone who had been waiting 2 years for someone to ask them. Preston Holt took the work and kept the credit, Adler had told Hess. Everyone on the desk knew. No one said anything because Preston had been there 16 years and Daniel had been there 4. The math was simple. Victoria read the summary twice. Then she read it a 3rd time. She was thinking about the way Daniel had moved through that appendix, not searching, but arriving. He had known what the document contained before he opened it. He had classified its structure in the time it took the room to stop laughing. She thought about what it costs a person to carry that kind of mind through 8 months of invisibility. To push a cart with a faulty wheel across a floor you once would have sat at the table of. To watch people whose analytical work was several standard deviations below yours treat the outcome of your labor as a joke. She had been in enough rooms with enough brilliant people to know that brilliance made none of that easier. In many ways it made it harder, because the contrast was clearer. She thought about what she herself had done in that conference room, the gesture of power that had invited him to sit, not because she expected anything, but because the power to invite and the power to humiliate were so easily confused at that altitude, and she had not always been careful about the distinction. She had used a person as a prop in a performance of authority. That the performance had accidentally revealed something exceptional did not make it less of what it was. These were not comfortable thoughts, but Victoria Hale had not built what she built by refusing to sit with uncomfortable conclusions. She put the summary in her desk drawer and called her executive assistant. "Schedule a meeting," she said. "Not here." The cafe was on the edge of River North, the kind of place that served pour-over coffee at prices that reflected the neighborhood's recent renovation, rather than the quality of the beans. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. The crowd was the city's specific mid-morning blend freelancers, parents with strollers, the occasional person in a suit who had missed a train. Daniel arrived 3 minutes early. He ordered a black coffee and took a table near the window. He was wearing the same canvas jacket he wore on weekends, dark green, slightly worn at the elbows, and he looked out at the rain-slicked street with the patience of someone who has spent a long time waiting for things. Victoria arrived precisely on time, alone, without the assistant or the security detail that usually accompanied her in public. She sat down across from him and got directly to the point, because in her experience, Elaborate preambles were an insult to intelligent people. "I've read your file," she said. "I know what happened at Northbridge. I know what the model was. I know whose name is on the IP filing and whose name should be." Daniel looked at his coffee. "I want to offer you the head of quantitative strategy position at Halstead Capital," Victoria said. "Direct report to me. 7-figure compensation. Full discretion over your team's composition and methodology." The rain tapped against the glass. "You made me a punchline," Daniel said. "Yes." Victoria did not flinch. "I did. It was a bad habit of power that I have been trying to recognize in myself for some time and have not succeeded in eliminating. I'm not offering this to compensate for that. I'm offering it because you're the best analyst I have encountered in 15 years. And I run a capital firm. And those two facts are all that should matter." Daniel was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window. A man walked by carrying an umbrella turned inside out by the wind, struggling to correct it without breaking stride. "I have a daughter," Daniel said. "She's 7. She thinks I'm a janitor. She's never asked me to be anything else, but I'd like her to have the version of me that I was supposed to be." Victoria waited. "I'll take the position," he said. "But I choose the team. Everyone I bring in, I've evaluated personally." "Agreed. And I want a non-retaliation clause written into my contract that specifically covers any employee who raises a concern about data integrity or attribution." There was a beat of silence. Victoria recognized the clause for what it was. A man who had been Preston Holted once and intended to ensure no one in his orbit would be Preston Holted again. "Agreed," she said again. 2 weeks later, Daniel Carr walked through the front entrance of the Halstead Capital Tower. The lobby security desk gave him a blue badge executive level. The elevator opened onto the 52nd floor. He walked to the office that had been prepared for him, a corner room with the same floor-to-ceiling glass, the same view toward the lake. He set down the canvas bag he had brought from home. He pulled out a framed photograph of Lily and placed it on the desk. He sat down and opened his laptop. He had work to do. Marcus Reeve had been at Halstead Capital for 11 years. He had survived 4 changes of leadership, 2 major market corrections, and 1 SEC inquiry that had brushed close enough to his desk to leave a scorch mark before concluding without charges. He understood, with the clarity of someone who has spent a decade navigating institutional power, that information was the real currency of a firm like Halstead, not the trades, not the fees, but the flow of data, who had access to it, and who could shape its interpretation. He had controlled that flow for years. The current structure suited him precisely. Daniel Carr's arrival disturbed the structure. Marcus's response was surgical. He did not oppose Daniel overtly. This was not the kind of firm where overt opposition to a CEO's hire was survivable. Instead, he worked through the mechanisms available to someone with 11 years of institutional scar tissue. He delayed Daniel's data access provisioning by routing it through a compliance review that moved at the speed of a glacier. He scheduled meetings that conflicted with the onboarding sessions Daniel had arranged for his new team. He allowed email threads about system permissions to sit unanswered for days. Daniel recorded all of it. Timestamps, access logs, the email trails. He did not raise the matter with Victoria. He filed it in a folder on his desktop labeled Administrative and continued working with the data he had access to, which was less than he needed but more than most people would have known what to do with. 6 weeks after he joined, Daniel brought a new analysis to Victoria. He had identified a cluster of rare earth metals, equities, a sector that received little mainstream analytical attention because the supply chain was exceptionally difficult to model. He had spent 2 weeks mapping it, tracking 3 interdependent choke points in the global lithium processing pipeline against seasonal contract renewal cycles and a shipping lane disruption in the Western Pacific that had barely made the financial press. His conclusion: the supply chain would tighten significantly within 90 days, and a set of specific mid-cap industrial stocks with rare earth exposure were substantially undervalued. Victoria approved the position. 93 days later, the sector moved sharply. Halstead closed the position with the largest single-quarter return the trading desk had generated in 3 years. The floor was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet after something seismic, not empty, but recalibrated. Marcus Reeve sat in his office on the 38th floor with the door closed and felt, for the first time in 11 years, the specific cold of a man whose position is no longer secure. He did not sit with that feeling for long before he began to think about what to do about it. Marcus's secret had a precise shape. Over 4 years, beginning in the period following the SEC inquiry that had come close without connecting, he had been routing a portion of Halstead's operational fee income through a series of internal cost center accounts, siphoning the excess into a holding structure that connected, through 3 layers of corporate intermediaries, to 2 offshore accounts registered in jurisdictions whose reporting requirements were conveniently minimal. The total, as of that November, was approximately $18 million. He had maintained this arrangement with meticulous care. No single transfer was large enough to flag an automated compliance alert. The cost center accounts were ones he had established during a legitimate accounting reorganization in his 2nd year, and had never been subjected to a detailed audit. The structure was elegant, in the way that long-maintained frauds sometimes are not complex, but invisible. Daniel's growing access to Halstead's data systems was a threat to its invisibility. Marcus had spent 3 weeks designing the countermove. He recruited a single ally, a systems administrator on the IT team named Warren, who had received the kind of performance review that suggested his position was not long for this organization, and who understood that Marcus had the influence to change that calculus. Warren required 3 days to complete his part of the arrangement. The evidence Marcus constructed was thorough. Log files showing Daniel's system credentials accessing restricted trading accounts outside business hours. A pattern of small algorithmic transactions executed through those accounts that, on the surface, resembled the kind of quiet front-running that had ended careers at other firms. A trail that pointed, with apparent clarity, at Daniel Carr. On a Thursday morning, during a scheduled executive leadership meeting, Marcus introduced the matter. He had timed it carefully. Victoria was present, as were the CFO, the head of compliance, and the general counsel. He had briefed the company's external compliance firm the previous afternoon, and 2 of their investigators were waiting in the lobby. We have identified what appears to be unauthorized access and a pattern of suspicious trading activity originating from Daniel Carr's account, Marcus said. His voice was steady, his expression the practiced gravity of a man delivering unwelcome news rather than engineering a man's destruction. I felt it necessary to bring this to the group's attention before taking any further steps. The 2 investigators entered the conference room. Everything that followed moved with the terrible efficiency of institutional process, the kind of process that is designed to act before the target of its action can respond. Because hesitation creates liability. Daniel was escorted from the building 20 minutes later. He did not speak. He carried his canvas bag over one shoulder. The framed photograph of Lily was inside it. He had thought to pick it up before the investigators asked him to step away from his desk, which later struck him as the most precise measure he had of how many times he had been through a version of this moment. Victoria Hale watched him leave through the lobby glass and said nothing. That evening, Victoria Hale sat in her home office on the 32nd floor of a building in Streeterville with the acquisition file for an unrelated matter open on her desk and completely unread. She was thinking about the shape of the evidence. Evidence in fraud investigations had a natural texture. It was partial, contradictory, buried in the operational noise of systems not designed to make fraud easy to find. It required excavation. The evidence Marcus had presented that morning had no texture. It was coherent, time-stamped, cross-referenced, and pointed in one direction with a clarity that real evidence almost never possessed. She had spent 15 years in financial services. She had seen 3 internal fraud investigations, 2 of them resulting in prosecution. The evidence in those cases had been fragmentary and disputed. It had required months of reconstruction. It had been the product of forensic work conducted after the fact. The evidence against Daniel had apparently been assembled and ready for presentation. She called Robert Hess. "I need an independent IT forensic audit," she said. "Not the external compliance firm. Someone with no prior relationship to Halstead. I need to know where the access logs were generated, not which account they're attributed to, but which physical terminal and which floor of the building they originated from." Hess called her back at 11:47 that evening. "The access logs traced back to a terminal on the 38th floor," he said. "The logs show the correct user ID, but the originating machine ID doesn't match any device that's ever been assigned to or accessed by Daniel Carr. The originating machine is registered to a user in the IT infrastructure group." Victoria sat with that for a moment. "Who is the IT infrastructure user?" Hess read the name. The 38th floor was Marcus Reeves' floor. She called Daniel at midnight. He answered on the second ring, which told her something about the quality of his sleep. "The audit puts the access logs on the 38th floor," she said, without preamble. A pause. Then, "I know who is behind this." "So do I." Another pause. Longer. When Daniel spoke again, his voice had the quality of a decision already made. "I need to come back in, and I need access to the cost center ledgers, not just the trading systems." "Why the cost center ledgers?" "Because Marcus didn't build this trap to stop me from finding something. He built it to stop me before I found what's already there." The authorization Victoria gave Daniel was technically a consulting access arrangement, structured through the Office of the General Counsel, which meant it bypassed the operational access controls that Marcus's 11 years of institutional influence had shaped. It also meant it generated no notification to anyone on the 38th floor. Daniel worked from a secure terminal in Robert Hess's office on the 47th floor. He had requested two things: full read access to Halstead's cost center account history going back 5 years, and a concurrent records pull from the firm's wire transfer system for the same period. Hess had both ready for him by 6 in the morning. What Daniel was looking for was not unusual in its category. This type of diversion was among the oldest forms of internal fraud, and the literature on it was extensive. What made Marcus's version difficult to identify through routine auditing was the patience of it. The transfers were small, the intervals irregular, the receiving cost centers legitimate in their original purpose. The structure was designed to look like accounting noise, but accounting noise had a statistical signature. The distribution of transfer amounts, the timing intervals, the correlation between transfer dates and periods when Marcus's direct reports were occupied with other priorities, all of it deviated from the baseline in ways that a pattern recognition framework would identify as non-random. Daniel had built one of those frameworks 2 years earlier. He had built it for a different purpose, but the underlying mathematics transferred. By 9:15, he had a complete map of the diversion $18 million across 4 years, routed through a structure that terminated in 2 accounts in the Cayman Islands, registered to a holding company whose beneficial ownership would require a court order to disclose, but whose formation date, registered agent, and address-matched records Daniel could access through a public commercial registry database. He compiled the analysis into a structured document and sent it, encrypted, to Robert Hess and to the General Counsel simultaneously. The document was 41 pages, heavily annotated, with a summary section up front that any competent regulator could follow without specialist knowledge. He had done that deliberately. The goal was not just to expose Marcus Reeve to Halstead's internal processes, which Marcus had spent 11 years learning to navigate, but to make the case legible to the people whose jurisdiction lay outside the building. Then he called Victoria. "It's ready," he said. Victoria had been maintaining Marcus's attention with the specific instrument available to CEOs when they needed to hold a person in place without alerting them. A meeting nominally about a strategic matter that required the COO's input and permitted no graceful exit. They were in the small conference room off the executive suite. Victoria, Marcus, and the CFO reviewing the annual capital allocation framework, a document that was genuinely important and that Marcus could not decline to discuss without signaling awareness of something he was not supposed to know anyone knew. At 10:52, Marcus looked at his phone. He had a scheduled wire transfer for 11 o'clock, the final transfer in the structure, after which the holding company would be dissolved and the money moved to a second-tier structure he had been building for 18 months. He had been precise about the timing for reasons that now felt, in retrospect, naively optimistic. "I need to step out for a few minutes," he said. Victoria set her pen down. Of course. He opened the conference room door. The hallway outside held 2 agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission and 1 from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They were accompanied by Robert Hess, who stepped aside to let them approach. Marcus Reeve stopped walking. The lead SEC agent introduced herself and began to speak. The language was formal, precise, the particular vocabulary of institutional consequence. Marcus listened to it with the expression of a man watching a calculation reach its conclusion. Not surprise exactly, but the recognition that a sequence he had set in motion had arrived at its logical end. Victoria watched from the doorway of the conference room. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. The firm-wide notification went out the following morning. It was brief, drafted by legal counsel, and stated the essential facts without elaboration. The COO function would be managed by the CFO on an interim basis. Employees with questions should direct them to human resources. The notification did not mention Daniel Carr. A separate communication went to Daniel from Victoria's office. 2 lines. "The allegations have been withdrawn. We would like you to return." He came back on a Monday. The same building, the same lobby, the same elevator to the 52nd floor. He retrieved his blue badge from the security desk they had kept it, which he noticed, and took the elevator up. The photograph of Lily was still in his bag. The floor was different in a way that was difficult to name. The work was the same, the desks and screens and the hum of the trading systems. But rooms carry the residue of what has happened in them. And the people in this room had watched a man be escorted out 5 days earlier and were now watching him return. And they understood, even without the full context, that the story had changed. A week after Daniel's return, Victoria called a meeting of Halstead's board of directors. It was an extraordinary session, not scheduled in the normal cadence of quarterly governance, which meant the board members arrived with the awareness that something material had occurred. Victoria presented the Marcus Reeve matter factually and without embellishment. She presented the regulatory timeline, the forensic audit findings, the estimated financial exposure. She answered the board's questions with precision. Then she set aside her prepared materials and spoke without notes. "We made a structural error," she said, "not just in the specific failure of oversight that allowed this to continue for 4 years. A larger error. This firm has evaluated talent through the filter of credential and pedigree for a long time. We have confused the signals of background with the substance of ability. We promoted people because they looked like the people who had been promoted before them. And we allowed people with the wrong credentials to become invisible to us, sometimes literally." The board was quiet. Daniel Carr identified a $4.3 billion acquisition risk that 6 weeks of formal due diligence had missed. He did it in 30 seconds with a document he had never seen before. He did it while wearing a cleaning uniform, and this firm's first response was to use him as a punchline. She paused. "I was the person who initiated that, and I want the board to have that on the record." She proposed a formal restructuring of Halstead's talent evaluation practices, a competency-based assessment framework that removed educational pedigree from the primary hiring criteria, introduced blind analytical evaluation for quantitative roles, and established a staff advocacy position that reported directly to the general counsel rather than to operations. The board voted to approve all 3 measures. After the meeting, Daniel found Victoria in the hallway outside the boardroom. She was looking out the window at the city below the long grid of it. the lake at its eastern edge, the winter sky above everything, pale and wide. "There is one more thing," she said, without turning. "We are naming you to the partnership. Full equity stake, effective the first of the year. The board approved it this morning." Daniel stood beside her at the window. He looked out at the city for a moment. "I have a condition," he said. She turned to look at him. "The competency framework," he said. "I want it written into the partnership agreement that it cannot be modified or suspended without a full board vote. Not an executive decision. The board." Victoria considered this. The request had the same quality as everything else he did: economical, precise, carrying more weight than its surface suggested. He was not asking for a symbolic commitment. He was asking for a structural guarantee, the kind that would outlast him and outlast her and outlast the specific circumstances that had made it necessary. He was asking for the institution to change, not just the people in it. "I'll have it drafted that way," she said. He nodded. He looked out the window again. Down on the street, 42 floors below, the city moved through its Tuesday morning taxis and pedestrians, and the particular purposeful rush of people going somewhere. The rain had stopped sometime in the night. The sky above the lake was a clean, cold blue, the kind of blue that appears in Chicago at the far edge of autumn, before the season turns for good. Daniel thought about Lily, about picking her up from school that afternoon, about the conversation he had been postponing for 8 months because he had not had the right version of himself to bring to it. He thought he might have it now. He had been rehearsing some version of it for weeks, not a speech, nothing so formal, just an honest accounting of what had happened and why they had spent the better part of a year in an apartment where the dinners were careful and the weekends were fine, but something important had been placed in storage. She deserved the explanation. He was not sure a 7-year-old needed all of it, but she needed enough to understand that her father had not disappeared. He had simply been waiting to find his way back. He had not fixed everything. The specific wrong done to him at Northbridge remained unfixed, and would likely remain so. Preston Holt still ran the algorithmic desk, and the IP filing still carried only one name. There were limits to what a story like this could repair. But something had changed. Not just for him, in the particular calculus of his career and his daughter's understanding of who her father was. Something in the institution itself, in the way it would look at the next person who carried quiet intelligence into a room where no one expected to find it. That, he thought, was the part that mattered most. Not the money, though the money was real and would change what was possible for Lily in the years ahead. Not the title, though he would not pretend the title was nothing. It was evidence, the kind that could be pointed to by the next person in the next room who needed someone to believe they were more than what their badge said. Not even the clause in the partnership agreement, though the clause was the thing he was most proud of, the thing that might outlast the rest. It was the fact that an institution had looked at itself clearly, found the image uncomfortable, and chosen to do something about it rather than adjusting the angle of the mirror. That was rare. That was worth having fought for. He picked up his canvas bag. He took the elevator down. The lobby was bright. The doors slid open onto the street. The air was cold and clear, and he walked out into it. And for the first time in a long time, he did not feel invisible.